how vulnerable should you be as a pastor? You know, you've seen it on both ends of the spectrum, right? On one end, pastors only talk about mistakes, if they talk about mistakes at all, that maybe they made 20 or 30 years ago, right? And these days, you know, they're fine. I'm always fine. I don't have any problems. Perfectly polished. On the other hand, you've also seen overshare city, where sermons feel more like a therapy session or a marriage fight you didn't really want to walk into. So the question is, like, what's the balance, right? Like, how much is too much? When do you say too much? When do you say too little? And in an age where the next generation craves authenticity and distrusts hype, that's not just a theoretical question, it's live, right? So let's break it down. First, let's ask this question. Why does vulnerability even matter? Well, in a world of spin, polish, and increasingly AI-generated everything, people are starving for something real. And real beats perfect. Always has, always will. Secondly, vulnerability creates connection, right? I've always believed that people admire your strengths, but they resonate with your weaknesses. I once heard a pastor say he and his wife never had a fight about money. And when I listened to that, you know what? I didn't feel inspired or encouraged. I felt shame. And I thought, my experience is the opposite. My wife and I, we've been married 35 years. We fought about everything. In fact, we have invented new topics to fight about. And so it alienated me. And then finally, in a world of deep fakes and digital facades, I think being fully human becomes your unfair advantage. Authenticity becomes the church's superpower and your superpower. The AI me may never mispronounce something, may never get it wrong, but the real me, which you're watching, hey, I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay. Maybe that is our superpower heading into an age of deep fakes and artificial general intelligence. So then the question still is, how do you know what to share and when to share it? So here's the framework I'm going to suggest that you adopt. It's one that I've used myself, and it's just 3 metaphors: wound, scab, scar. Wound, scab, scar. Just like your physical body, as it heals, your emotional and spiritual life have stages of healing. And every stage will show you whether it's time to share or whether it's time to stay silent. So let's start with wounds. Wounds are fresh. They're raw. You're in it. You're not healed. You're not even healing yet, okay? Maybe, for example, your marriage in this season is barely hanging on, or maybe you're burning out, or you're battling depression, or your staff is falling apart. You're in the middle of some kind of mutiny or abandoned ship. And in that season, you don't know how or even if you will get through it. Here's the rule. Don't preach your wound. Process it. Wounds are for your counselor, okay? They're for your inner circle. They're for your best friend. They're not for your congregation. Because when you bleed publicly, you're asking people to hold you together, right? And that's not fair to them. When I was burning out, I didn't talk about it. I couldn't talk about it. I was barely getting up every day. You know what you need? You need a safe place. Now, some things absolutely belong in a counselor's office. Therapy and coaching, huge fans, still go to a counselor. They're essential. But a great place to process leadership questions with people who have been there and understand the challenges you do is the Art of Leadership Academy. And if you're not part of that kind of community, I want to encourage you to check it out. It's the kind of space where you can be open, honest, and truly grow from the interaction. You know, not every wound is like a 911 emergency. Sometimes you just got staffing challenges, or you're like, I don't know what to do with my executive pastor, or I don't know what to do over this situation, right? So it's a place where you can share what you're learning. It's troll-free. Gather insights from thousands and thousands of other leaders and get practical tools from people like myself. If you aren't part of my community already, now's the time to join. You don't have to lead alone. So we've got wounds. Well, you know what happens to a wound, right? Assuming you're healing, is eventually it starts to heal. And then you move into the scab stage. And in the scab stage, it looks like things are getting better, right? It's healing. But if you pick at it, you could reopen the wound. Scabs are tricky. So when you're thinking about sharing and it's scabbing over, be careful. Ask yourself. And here's the big question. Is this resolved enough to be helpful? Can I tell this story without hurting the people involved? Am I preaching healing, or am I still looking for healing? If you're in the middle of it, just remember, it's better to bleed in private than unravel in public. I remember about a year or two after I burned out, I decided I would start to talk about burnout. And I was in Philadelphia, and I was with this mega church teaching their staff. And after I told the story, the senior pastor pulled me aside and he just looked me in the eye and he goes, "Are you okay?" And you know what I realized then? Still too much of a wound, not enough of a scab. The healing was started, but I wasn't particularly helpful that day. Now I talk to leaders around the world about burnout, no problem, because it's not a wound, it's not a scab, it's a scar. And now, finally, that's the third stage. The scab heals, right? Eventually, you just get a scar. It's that time you fell off your bike when you were 5, right? Or, the skiing accident last winter or something like that. A scar is a story. And basically, a scar says, this is how I got hurt, this is how I healed, and here's what I learned. You're not looking for sympathy anymore. You're offering help. And this is kind of the sweet spot. The best leaders don't hide their scars. They leverage them. And remember, sometimes it only takes 6 months for a scar to heal over. Your stories don't all have to be 10, 20, 30 years old, okay? Scars can form very quickly. And here's the caveat though, right? If all your scar stories are from 20 years ago, it creates a different kind of problem. It says, hey, I used to struggle, that was me, but now I've arrived. And no one relates to somebody who's arrived. So you want to mix in some scars that are a little bit fresher, use the criteria I've talked about, but you might want to think about talking about a scab as well. So you want to wind in some current stories or very recent stories and share them, not to show off your success, but to remind people that you're still in the struggle with them too. So how vulnerable should you be? Use the framework: wound, scab, scar. Vulnerability from our leader shapes the leader and the listener. Wounds are for your therapists, not for your congregation. Don't preach your wounds, process them. Scabs can be shared, but only when the healing has started and others can benefit. So that's when you can take it out to a wider circle, if that's true. Scars are where your deepest credibility lives. They're proof that God heals, that growth is possible, that the journey continues, and that you too, as a leader, are a work in progress. You're the kind of leader people can trust, follow, and learn from. And then once you get a scar, well, now you've got a story to tell, and you can tell it safely with the view of really helping the people process their own wounds and their own scabs. So the question is, what are you learning about vulnerability? What stories are you ready to share? Which ones probably still need a little bit of time before they're actually helpful to share them publicly? And maybe, have you ever made any mistakes like I did in sharing too much or too little? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear from you.